Hey everybody. Let me see here. I just want to make sure. Make sure my volume levels and everything are good. Let me see. Just turn up my microphone a little bit. Got some people in the chat already, it looks like. So yep, this is my first time doing a live stream on YouTube, so bear with me a little bit here as I kind of get things set up and get used to this interface. Good morning, Stephanie. Can you hear me okay? So today we're going to be discussing Franz Bardon his initiation into Hermetics. So came to Franz Bardon about 10 years ago about that. And the interesting thing was at the time I was studying Hermetic philosophy of like the early 20th century, and I was like getting into the Golden Dawn, and I like the Golden Dawn system through Israel Regardie's book on the Golden Dawn, but I found it kind of inaccessible in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of practices in there, but there's not a lot of explanation as to how to really do this stuff. If you read Israel Regardie's work, you can kind of get a sense of how to do things, but it's sort of a difficult system to work. Also started reading some of Aleister Crowley's works and stuff too. But yeah, Aleister Crowley has a similar problem where you can't really figure out how to necessarily work his system just from reading his books. I mean, you could read all the books and talk to people who are Thelemites and then get an idea. But it's sort of a difficult system as an outsider to work. So like, I was like, how do you make this Hermetic system work really? Like, how do you get into the practice? Which led me to Franz Bardon's works. So this is the primary book we're talking about. This is Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics. And among a lot of people in the occult circles that have been around for a while, you talk to them about Franz Bardon systems. A lot of people are aware of him. And one of the things that's interesting about Franz Bardon's system is most of the people you run into that know him well will say, yeah, oh yeah, I've read his books, but like his training system is practically impossible. Like, and that's the thing about Bardon's training system. It's really good, but very difficult to work. So Franz Bardon was born in 1909 in Czechoslovakia. He lived through a really difficult period in time, living through the Second World War, actually being in a concentration camp at one point, and then ending up under socialism, which led him to being arrested because he was practicing magic at the time. He had an herbalist shop where he sold herbal cures and was doing like basically what we would think of as faith healing treatments like Reiki and prescribing herbs. And the socialist government in Czechoslovakia didn't like this. So they ended up arresting him, and he died in prison, in fact, because he wasn't getting the proper treatment there. And he ended up dying of pancreatitis. And it's sort of strange because one of his students, Dr. MK, was actually running the hospital in which he died. And if you want to know more about Franz Bardon's just life beyond his training system, there's a fantastic book called Memories of Franz Bardon that was written by Dr. Lumir Bardon, who is Franz Bardon's son, and Dr. MK, who is Franz Bardon's student. So it's a book filled with interesting anecdotes and little tidbits about Franz Bardon's life. Franz Bardon was born to his father, in fact, was an occultist, and his father was looking for a master to come to him. And what his father believed was that Franz Bardon himself was the master that he was looking for. And Franz, as a 9-year-old boy in school, remembered that this spirit had come to him from the beyond of a master occultist and like basically like Franz Bardon's higher self. And Franz Bardon took on this personality, and then he said he suddenly had access to all this occult knowledge and power. Um, and then he would take that forward later and then build it into his training system. He ended up with a large following of students of both men and women. He initiated both men and women into his system, and it's a system that is still in existence in Czechoslovakia today. There are still students that are following the Franz Bardon system. His shop that sold herbal cures is still there, being run by his son Lumir, and there are adherents to his system all over the world. But it's sort of like a little bit a lesser known system. So let's get into this a bit. What did he do that was so different from everybody else? Well, what he did is he took hermetic practice and he built it into a system in which a person could train themselves from absolutely knowing nothing to being an initiate or an adept. And they wouldn't need to join a group, and they wouldn't need to find a teacher or a master or read a whole bunch of books. They could follow just his training system and be able to work through this. His training system, according to him, was designed to be used for the busiest person in the world. So his theory was just that with a little bit of time each day to devote to these practices, you could move yourself forward and eventually achieve adepthood, even if you were really busy, even if it took you many, many years. And the way that his system is broken down is he had this idea that many training systems didn't allow people to train in a very consistent and fulfilled way across the board of their spirituality, where they would do like more like one-sided training. Like you could, if you look at the Golden Dawn system, there's lots and lots of rituals that you perform every single day. But other practices such as like diet and journaling and all these other things are not as prescribed. And so, according to Franz Bardon, these systems would train you in a very lopsided way, and certain aspects, like say your magical abilities, would become enhanced, but other things would become underdeveloped. And he said that this was a dangerous sort of way to train. And so he came up with this. Basically, in every step of an initiation into Hermetics, there's 3 steps that you perform. One is called the magic schooling of the spirit, and that has to do with meditative practices that you bring in. Another one is magical schooling of the soul, and that are journaling practices and introspection practices. And then finally, they have the magical schooling of the physical body, and those are like the actual physical practices and things like in the very beginning, he has you doing exercising and breathing exercises and having you do all kinds of things in order to train yourself. The difficulty of doing these trainings is that there is a cultural rift, I think, between what's going on in Czechoslovakia and what's going on in the US. So, like, some of these practices don't really make sense to us necessarily. Like, there's one in there where you're supposed to take supposed to bathe in really cold water, and the idea is because hot water is positively charged and cold water is negatively charged. So he has this whole idea of how you're supposed to bathe, and then you're supposed to like scrub yourself with this really hard bristle brush. And I think some of the confusion and the difficulty people have with the system is making it work for your cultural context, right? And one of the best guides I have found to working the system, and I really think that if you were to buy this book, you should just buy this other book right away to go with this, is Ron Clark has wrote this book called A Bardon Companion. This I got when I started practicing. It's the second edition from 2010. So there you go. It's like 10 years. It's the second edition, but I think he has a more revised and updated edition. It's self-published. In this book, he goes step by step through Bardon's system and gives you his notes on it. And And Ron Clark, I believe he lives in California, if I'm not mistaken. So he is coming from Bardon's system and has been working Bardon's system from like the 70s or 80s or something, I think. And so he has a cultural perspective more congruent with America, but he's been working Bardon's system. So he has some perspectives in here. For instance, like he was talking about, Bardon will go into like your daily routine and like the things that you should be doing. And what Ron Clark will point out is that you don't have to do exactly what Bardon says in his book, like step by step. You can come to your own sensible daily routine that will work for you, that will still work within this system. And I think using Ron's guide in addition to initiation into hermetics makes the system way easier and way more able for somebody to actually get through. Another thing that Ron points out in his companion is that you don't have to become a master at each one of these steps in order to move forward. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up, is that they spend so much time on step one, because step one for somebody not already practicing is so incredibly hard to get through and to actually wrap your mind around, that you can get stuck on step one for months and months just trying to master the meditation routine, and the practices in there. And so what Ron points out is really all you need to do is gain a certain level of proficiency in order to move on, and to just do the practices every day and get to a point where you can move on to the next step. And I think once like you start putting that into practice, you'll move through the steps pretty quickly. Now, one of the big features of initiation into hermetics that I haven't seen in other training systems is this concept of the light and the dark soul mirrors. So right in step one, Bardon introduces this concept of the light and dark soul mirror. And what you do in this system is that you basically every single day you work for a few minutes to journal about um, some of the positive qualities you have and some of the negative qualities that you think you have, right? And you just try to like be very balanced and very unbiased about it and just write it down. Once you have the initial phase of all of these qualities written down, then you go through and you start categorizing them by their elemental qualities, either fire, water, earth, and air. And then you can start working to change the dark soul mirror aspects into being positive, useful. You're basically transforming those into positive, useful aspects for yourself. And then he has techniques that you use with mantras, basically positive affirmations and all kinds of things in order to transform this dark soul mirror into positive aspects. So most people working the Bardon system have been working on these dark and light soul mirrors for years and years and years, and this is just a part of the system that's sort of never ending. A next part that is pretty pretty unique to Bardon in my experience is this concept of psychic larva that he brings up in one of the later steps having to do with the magic mirror. And it's not really something that I've seen in many other systems. Sometimes in hermetic systems, they'll talk about daemons or daimones, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And these daimones are something that we're all born with. There's a certain amount of daimones that are good, and there's a certain amount of daimones that are evil, and they are kind of around you. But what Bardon adds to this is that there's this concept where at a heightened ecstatic states of like mental stress or at other times, your mind can actually create these psychic larvae, and these psychic larvae attach to you, and then they feed off of you when you get back into those states of distress. So like those psychic larvae are basically always trying to like agitate you to get you back into those states so that they can feed off of you. And in Bardon's system, like one of the things that you work on is to remove these psychic larvae and remove their influences from your life. And it's one of the interesting things. It's almost like pre-psychology, early psychology thing. And there's lots of mysticism mixed into Bardon around these things. And then that brings up the fact that one of the major tools of the Bardon system is the magic mirror. It's one of his, primary things that he focuses on at the very end of the system after you get through the 8 steps. And the 8 steps, after the 8th step, that's kind of like where you can start doing real magical work in his system. So after step 8, you start doing some real stuff with the magic mirror. And the magic mirror, you can build very simply. He has steps that you can make it out of just like cardboard. And with the magic mirror, you can start sending energy, you can start astral traveling, you can start receiving energy, you can start communicating with spirits and things like that. Really cool system. And then that leads into his second book, which is the practice of magical evocation. And in the practice of magical evocation is basically an entire book devoted to using the magic mirror that you develop and build as part of initiation into Hermetics. He would later come out with a book called The Key to the True Kabbalah, and that deals with his Kabbalistic theories. And then after that, though, although he had manuscripts written for other books, he never really got them to a point where they could be released. And some of his students have released bits and pieces of his other works over time, but he had a plan to write a whole bunch of books, but his life was cut short by pancreatitis. So unfortunately, we'll never have those books. But his students did release some other very useful things. For instance, another one that's kind of indispensable is Franz Bardon Question and Answers. And in this book, one of his students, basically, these are their notes from their study group, is essentially what this book boils down to. But really, the most useful part of this book is when you get into the back of the book and they have these grids of the positive and negative pieces of the soul mirror, what they mean, what elements they're related to, and it will help you greatly in building your own soul mirror and in working with it and working his system. So this is one of the key books if you're going to work the Bardon system in order to do this practice. I think the key takeaway here, if you follow the Bardon system, you'll recognize so many other things from ritual and occult practice in here. He has a very, I would say, standard view of occult practice that you could then take to anything else that you're doing. Like you could take this and apply it to Thelema if you want. You could take this and apply it to Wiccan practice. You could take it and apply it to Christian mysticism or any other type of mysticism you're practicing. It's a very non-denominational type of occult practice that you can then take and apply to anything else. He doesn't prescribe any type of religion. He doesn't prescribe any type of mysticism specifically. He just builds a very general system for occult and spiritual training for then people to take to whatever religious tradition or a belief system that they already have. And I think that's one of the great powers of Bardon. There's so many other occult training systems where they're very prescriptive about the type of religions or whatnot that their training system applies to. And even things that would be seemingly non-denominational, like Rosicrucian systems, like Amorc or BOTA or whatnot, like they are non-denominational, but when you kind of get in there, they have a Christian flavor, or you'll get in there and they have a very specific traditional background that they're focusing on, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, very clearly a mixture of Christianity and a mixture of Egyptian mysticism mixed together. Some systems are very clearly Gnostic. This is very clearly not driving you toward anything that you could take and then apply to anything else that you want to do. So that's my I guess it's like, oh geez, like a sales pitch for this thing. Anyway, it is sort of a sales pitch. It's a good training system if you want to know what a ritual magic training system is, but don't want to be preached to. And I think that fits a lot of people in the Wiccan community. Like, we just want to read a thing and go, yeah, this is what it is, but I don't want to be preached to. At least that's kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, wrapping up, occult training in a ritualistic ritual magic context um, is very complex. And I think for most of us, we want to have something simple, but still get a broad picture of what occult training or what the practice looks like. And I think Franz Bardon is a very good system for that. I think it's a very workable system. I think there's a lot of ways that you can mold it to your own practice in your own way and don't have to necessarily follow it exactly to the letter. And I think that gives it really a high watermark in terms of um, what people should be considering if they're looking into getting to ritual magic, but they don't want to read, 10,000 plus page books or something like that, which, I mean, who has time for that? So that's my spiel. Let me know if anybody has questions. I'll post this video around, and yeah, let me know if you all like the live stream. I can do some more of these. We can get a better time together. I just happen to have time today, and I will talk to you all later and see you online. Blessed be.